on that note, I'd like to introduce my first panelist, which is Bob Anibale from Citi. Bob. And my second panelist will be Mark Palmer-Edgecombe, who's the head of diversity for Google. And my third panelist is Claire Lucas, who is a presidential appointee with USAID. And she...
Thank you so much.
Claire is also senior advisor for the private-public partnership, which is part of the discussion this afternoon. And the final panelist is Harry Gaskell, who is from Ernst & Young. Right, to kick us off this afternoon, I'd like to sort of just maybe ask what you as corporations have been doing. We've heard a lot over the last couple of days on the US and the UK. What are you doing sort of on an international basis to try to improve employment rights, but also just rights in general across the world? Can I throw that to Harry, first of all?
No, certainly. I mean, let me start off with what we're doing in the LGBT arena. So Ernst & Young is probably best thought of as a sort of federation of national businesses. And with each of those businesses in the last few years, networks have been growing up of LGBT people. And what we're doing now is trying to join those networks together. So I think for the first time 2 days ago in London, around about 20 of those network leaders met up under the chairmanship of one of our global board. And I think actually quite a lot of them are around the table just over there. And what we're aiming to do really is to share what works in various different countries in the world and to make sure that within the firm we're putting pressure where appropriate on our own management to do the right thing. But also I think there's probably something psychological there, isn't there, about coming together and feeling the strength of a network around the place. So that's what we're up to on this particular rights issue, because I see it as a rights issue. But elsewhere, in other areas, we are trying to bring, for all of our people, the appropriate rights issues to the fore. And where that means lobbying governments, we will do that. And we're Ernst & Young, so we have a discreet style, let's say, in terms of our lobbying. Thank you for that. But that's, it is nevertheless, we try to be polite and discreet, but also firm and forceful. This is an important issue for many of our 140,000 people around the world, and that means it's an important business issue for us too.
And Mark, can I ask you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Google is a very young company, but within our short history, we've already achieved a lot in the LGBT space, and we're recognized as one of the leaders in this field. And what we're trying to do now is actually take the LGBT agenda to the next level from a corporate perspective. And it's very exciting for us. Actually, tomorrow we're launching a campaign, a brand new campaign, which we call Legalize Love. And what we intend to do is in every country in which Google has an office around the world, where it's either illegal to be gay or there are anti-gay laws, or where the culture is homophobic, we intend to work to change that so that our employees who are gay and lesbian and bisexual, transgender, have the same experience outside the office as they do inside the office. And this is obviously a very ambitious piece of work.
Mm-hmm. Bob, would you?
In addition to what I said earlier, it also is that for us, it's about right now ensuring all of course, our corporate policies and benefits are consistent and equal around the world where they can be. But I think that one of our big ambitions is the communication to many other parts of the world where perhaps they're watching more what we've done in the United States or Europe and not in the local footprint and that local market. So I think reaching out and finding ways in stages of beginning the communication, looking at the needs and also the benefits that we can introduce into a local market. That's where I think partnership and collaboration will be hugely helpful as we look at many of the more complex local markets. Mm-hmm. Where of course then countries like Mexico and Brazil and others, I think they'll have very vibrant centers where it'll be more well received and not from a legal benefit may be hindered, but socially it's progressive in trying to introduce some of these changes.
I was interested in your campaign that you're about to launch for Legalize Love, Mark. because that is sort of taking you into the realm of almost beginning to sort of lobby governments. And if I, we're all the corporations here probably at different sort of stages on that journey. You as a corporation probably are able to step up and do that. I'd be interested to hear as well what the others feel on whether they might be able, what they could do along that line. Can I ask you to sort of elaborate a little bit more on that, how you plan to lobby?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we can't do everything all at once. So there are many countries in which we have offices where these issues are prevailing. So when I kind of developed this strategy, the first thing I did was go and talk to our public policy people, because actually they will have to do the lobbying. I won't be doing it myself. And they will be doing it in the local countries. So we actually kind of went through a list of where we thought we could actually start to get traction on this. And what we're probably going to do is take 2 countries initially, Poland and Singapore, and we believe that in those 2 countries we can actually work both at an individual level to lobby the government, but also to build collaboration with other corporates who also feel the same way that we do, and kind of create a collective lobbying body who will work with the government. And I think Singapore is a particularly interesting example because they want to be a global financial center, they want to be world leaders, and we can actually push them on the fact that being a world leader, being a global financial center means that actually you have to be able to treat all people the same, irrespective of their sexual orientation. And I'd be interested actually to know, you have kind of more of a government perspective, how you think we'll be able to succeed.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me as a representative of the U.S. government. And one thing that we're very lucky, before I get to that, is that we have tremendous leadership with this administration, with President Obama and Secretary Clinton in the area of LGBT equality. So there has been a tremendous amount of activity on the part of the U.S. government at USAID and at the State Department in terms of LGBT work. So the way that we work is much less so in terms of lobbying other governments, but actually strengthening civil society organizations in these countries to do the work that they think is important and with their objectives and goals and how they think it needs to be done in that particular country. And we are working with quite a few different other partners, some NGOs, and some corporations on a global LGBT partnership. And how it's operating is that the corporations are actually co-funding with the US government these civil society organizations all around the world. So that's how we think that change best happens in this type of work.
Interesting. Harry, would you like to, how would Ernst & Young sort of feel that being able to, what Google is doing, what would you feel on that?
Well, I think we're very keen on business-led change initiatives. Yeah. If I were to pick on one in a slightly different sphere, Catalyst in the States has done tremendous work explaining why gender equality is good for business and therefore putting pressure on people to change the law and to change regulation. And I think if we could become part of an organisation, a similar business-led organisation that was pushing for change in this area, that's the kind of thing we feel very comfortable about.
And Bob, do you?
Yeah, I think also the fact that Google, and although it has bricks and mortars in places, we think of it as so virtual. Yeah. And its appeal is very wide, but also young demographically. I mean, it's quite a wide demographic, I'm sure. But it can help spread messaging very, very quickly through, as social media does in general, both for political and other forms of information. So I think it's very helpful. I think it will help raise and elevate the discussion much faster than we can otherwise. I think the importance of supporting civil society, whether it's the equivalents or pieces of organizations that can act as Out and Equal does or others in the respective country, is also critical to building that dialogue with both regulators and in terms of legislators and others, because I think that's just one of those multifaceted ways we're going to have to get messaging out.
Yeah. Sorry, could I just pick up on a point that Harry made as well? Because, for me, there are 2 reasons why we would do this. One is that obviously it's the right thing to do. But secondly, there's a very powerful business case for us to do this, coming back to your point about Catalyst. And the business case for us is that we operate in many, many countries and we have a very globally mobile workforce. And actually we have had a number of instances where we've been trying to hire people into countries where there are these issues, and we have been unable to put those people, the best person for the job, into that country. And conversely, we've had to move people out of countries where they've been experiencing homophobia to different locations. And we're also having to support staff in those countries in terms of relationships with the government, homophobia they've experienced outside the office. So there's a very profound business reason to do this, as well as it being the right thing to do.
Right.
And in fact, if I could just also kind of talk a little bit more about power, since we're on that topic. I think if you're trying to change something, governments can exert diplomatic power and other power. NGOs like your own, like Kaleidoscope, David, can marshal facts and can marshal arguments. But corporations primarily marshal economic power, and that is something that even the most repressive of countries will listen to in the end.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're quite right with Singapore. How in Asia, I think there was one of the presenters yesterday talked about how business actually has quite an impact upon those governments in that part of the world, even more so than sometimes than governments do.
Well, and what we found, USAID, for example, has done 1,000 partnerships across the globe with about 4,000 distinct partners. And what we have found is actually a partnership between corporations and the U.S. government is very effective because corporations bring expertise, for example, that the U.S. government cannot possibly purchase, right? We bring a convening power of different stakeholders to the table, including civil society and corporations. And it's really critically important, I believe, that civil society and corporations talk to each other in doing this kind of work along with the government. So for me, it's good to get different actors sort of together looking at a particular issue and then everybody using their own expertise to solve the problem.
Yeah. I was just interested with yourselves, Harry, at Ernst & Young, because I know that you were Employer of the Year here in the UK for LGBT issues. How does that, and you are, the fantastic job here in the UK, how does that actually sort of pan out as an international company, though?
Well, I think perhaps you should ask us the 20 people in the corner
Yeah.
over there. And we are, it must be said, ridiculously proud of that Stonewall Award, so thank you for mentioning it yet again. I think we have to be very careful about transferring lessons from the UK, from the US elsewhere. One of the problems we have as a business is that we are a business which is most powerful in Anglo-Saxon countries. And taking Anglo-Saxon culture and trying to export it, trying to force it down people's throats is a really bad idea. And I think this is a particular example of that. So I think where there are lessons we've learned here about what works in the UK in making us an inclusive employer, that's great. I think we've got to think very carefully about whether those same approaches, networks, sponsoring, mentoring, leadership programs, whether those will work at all or whether we need to heavily modify them if they're to be adopted by other countries in the EY family.
And you can figure that out through dialogue with the civil society organizations in those countries, partly.
I think so.
Yes, and governments.
Did you have any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, most of our companies around the world attract very high quality, very talented people, right? I think they're all the kind of companies that many mobile, young very often, and highly qualified local nationals, it appeals to people. And I think that we have the employees and the staff that can take this dialogue further. Very often it's about helping create that enabling environment so that what will work or what is the right pace or what might be the models in different countries need to be discussed in that local context as well. And I think one of the benefits of almost all the companies here is they all have some of the best talent and experienced people in the country that they can convene.
When just earlier on when I introduced myself, I was mentioned that we've launched a campaign for decriminalisation across the world. And in conjunction with World Pride, we hosted a conference a couple of days ago here in London. The audience there was very different to the audience here. It was about 50, 60 delegates, LGBT activists from mainly countries in Africa, Caribbean, Asia, where it is still illegal to be gay and where their lives are at risk. I actually moderated a session on the last day, very similar to this, at the conference, and I actually mentioned that over the next 2 days that the corporate world would be holding a conference to talk about employment rights, but also how the corporate world could get involved in this. And the reaction was really very hostile from the audience. Why are corporates want to be? What's they got to do with it? It was a deep suspicion that was there, and it's a real one, that we shouldn't be seen. They fear that Western corporations will be coming in trying to exploit, to tell them what to do. The same goes with governments. And I just really wanted to open that up to the panel here, just to see what your thoughts were on that.
I mean, that's why I'm such a proponent, and our agency is such a proponent of actually, helping the nationals in a particular country, especially, countries that are so very different from ours. If we're talking about going into African countries, some of the Latin American countries, but helping those folks do their own work. And we have many of the same values and goals that they do, but helping them do their own work, technical assistance, empowerment, and so forth. So that's how we approach it.
Okay. And Mark?
I mean, I can completely understand why they would feel that, actually.
Yeah.
Because if you are in a country where the law is very hostile, the culture is very hostile, why would you just trust that your employer is not going to be any different? And, even at Google, which is a very enlightened employer and very gay-friendly, we've had the same kind of issues with our gay staff in some of those countries. And, for example, in India, we set up our Gaygler group, that's what we call our gay staff. We set up a Gaygler group in India with just straight allies initially to try and create a safe space there where we could get our gay staff to come out. And nobody did. So then we set up a big conference in Bangalore with a local LGBT rights activist, and we kind of made it compulsory almost for everyone in the office to attend that, so it would be a safe environment where everyone could come. And we had an email from a gay member of staff in another office in India who said they really wanted to come, but they were afraid of being outed by coming to the conference. So they said, we'll take a day's holiday, we'll come to the conference, but please don't tell anyone in my office that I'm coming. So we paid all their travel and everything. They came to the conference. They had such a fantastic experience that they felt then comfortable enough to go back to their home office and actually start a Gaygler group in that office. And this member of staff went so far so quickly that within a year, he was the Google representative at the very front of Mardi Gras in Sydney, which we sponsored. So I think, it's about building safe relationships with the people on the ground in the local country and making them understand that they can deal with corporates and that they won't be exposed through doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think 20 years ago, if you spoke to any law firms in the city here or to most banks, you would have found people very formal and reticent to step up and come out as well. This is an amazing change over the period of time. And in many other countries too, all of these professions and major corporations are seen as very much this citadel of the establishment, of the elite and the successful, international or not. They still have represent themselves that way. And I deal with many in areas like microfinance and others, where you're working with alternative deliverers and community organizations. There's a lot of linkages to be established and trust to be established that doesn't exist. And had very little historic precedent. So it is about investing in those dialogues. And Kaleidoscope and other organizations, I think, are the type that help facilitate that.
Yeah. I mean, if you hadn't to add on that, Harry.
Well, I just think people should be suspicious of corporations. I think it's a perfectly sensible thing to do. I mean, outside work, if a corporation tries to help me, I think twice. What's the interest? But as Mark said, the interest is very straightforward. Rights and inclusion are good for business. It's as straightforward as that.
Yeah. No, I mean, we at Kaleidoscope in the last sort of 10 months have been building up a relationship with activists in the Global South, just trying to gain their trust and to make them understand that we want to engage, we want to learn from them. So it's not us imposing on what we feel that they should be doing, but what they need. In some countries, they're calling for decriminalisation. In others, they're saying it's the last thing we want. It would actually upset what is a very delicate balance. So that's, I think, a role that an organisation like ours can play, to that sort of conduit between the two.
I think it's very important before starting any, and one thing is meaningful work within the confines of an organizational structure, but as you reach out further beyond the bounds of sort of a corporate structure, but to actually do a landscape analysis to see where a particular country is in terms of their rights, see who the players are, and then how to work with those players and strengthen those players. Google has, we're in discussions right now with Google as part of our partnership And there are folks in this room who are part of our partnership, but Google has unprecedented expertise that coming together with the US government it's just wonderful, you know, how we're coming together on this initiative. So, but we have to do it with the local stakeholders in mind and in conjunction with them hand in hand, otherwise we're not going to get anywhere and it will be bad for them.
And Claire, do you see this as sort of a blueprint for other countries to follow, or how would you want to bring them in?
In this partnership, and we're in the middle of a procurement process, so I'm not allowed to get too detailed, but welcome to the U.S. government. Yeah, okay. And all of you know about the U.S. government procurement process anyways. But we are working with at least one other bilateral agency, and other bilateral agencies have shown some interest, and then a host of private sector companies. And we are going to go in deeply into about 6 to 8 countries and do landscape analyses before we even begin, and work through local stakeholders and leverage the expertise of our wonderful private corporate partners in this initiative. So, you know, anyways, I think it's a useful model.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you put that very eloquently to say you do a landscape analysis, and I think it's an incredibly complex equation, or as we'd say in Google, an algorithm that we're dealing with here is how do you change the law and the culture in those countries. So I think you have to take a very pragmatic and country-by-country approach and really deeply understand the culture, the issues, and everything around it. You can't just have this blueprint that you then bang on to every other geography.
And that, I was going to say, that is something that could be done collaboratively very well, too.
Yeah.
There are a number of countries where sharing that, because each of our organizations have different perspectives into that society or into that business environment. That's an area where I think it would be very interesting to do some collaborative work with others.
We, as an organisation focused on international LGBT rights, we are part of a network of similar organisations in other countries, the US, France, Spain, Scandinavian countries, Germany, Canada, called the Amsterdam Network. It's a fairly sort of loose organisation, but we inform one another of what our own governments are doing and what we are doing to sort of try to influence them in certain ways. And I know that we are looking to bring together an intergovernmental conference to talk about aid towards countries on LGBT rights. And that would be, we would probably be a part of that, but it could be very interesting to have some of the corporate world there as well. I mean, I don't know what your views would be on that.
No, I think that discussion is much needed, and I think the corporations should absolutely be at the table. The corporations are doing so much important work in this area and funding such important work. So absolutely, so I think, you know, bilaterals, NGOs, and the corporate private sector along with foundations. I think it would be an incredible conference. So.
Yeah, because I don't think in the past that the corporate world has been there. It's, you know, I think.
I think the corporate world should absolutely have to be there. I mean, if you look at the United States, it's the private sector that has really, in many ways, led the progress that we have attained thus far on LGBT equality. I mean, we, you know, and the private sector can move things much more quickly often than the government. So. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think the last conference was about 2 years ago on this issue in Stockholm, and the NGOs were there as a sort of a side meeting, as it were. So the next one is we're hoping sometime in the next 6 months. So, and as representatives of the corporate world, would you be?
I'd be totally up for being there.
Yeah, yeah. That's good.
Yeah, I think if you look at the last sort of 20 years before the crash in 2008, corporates, we were told very clearly, your business is making money. You know, don't do other stuff. Leave that to NGOs or government. Your responsibility is to make money. I think that idea is one of the things that perished in 2008, 2009. And I think you're seeing corporates now split into 2 groups. Those whose primary motivation is profit, and those who believe in making money but also in creating social value. Yeah. And I think you'll see the corporate world diverge quite dramatically in the next few years. So I think for that second group who believe in social value as well as making money, I mean,
for those that believe that you have social value is making money, having diversity as a core part of your business is good for the bottom line.
You're right to pick me up on it, because the 2 of them are linked. They're not opposites, they are completely linked. And I think you'll find that group of people will be very interested in that type of conference, yes.
Okay.
And it's very much an interest of our employees in general, too, and of course of many of our clients, how we're positioned and viewed in this space, and providing value and being a diverse organization. I mean, clearly, LGBT is one of the issues and part of this diversity, but so are the role of women, and so are other minorities in the case of some countries in the workforce. And so I think for all of us, we realize that's so important in all other levels of both the way our staff perceive us, the way our recruitment is driven and people are identify with us, and even the way our clients see us. And so I think there is a sound business as well as a moral reason to be leading on this.
And Mark, you...
Yeah, I was just going to add, I completely agree with what you were saying, and I think that there is this dichotomy developing between two types of business, and I think Google are kind of at one extreme end of that, in that we completely put our employees at the center of everything that we do. We completely understand that our employees are our greatest asset, and I know many companies say that rather tritely, but we absolutely believe that, and that's why I think that we can so easily do a campaign like Legalize Love, because for us it is a completely logical extension of ensuring that our staff have a great experience wherever they work in the world.
It's interesting that today, I mean, conferences in London, the US and the UK are probably sort of in the leading countries for promoting LGBT rights internationally. What I would be interested in is corporations like Samsung or some of the really big multinationals, as it were, from, I wouldn't say the developing world, but out of that part of the global south. How do you think that we could engage them so that in a year or 2 years' time that we have them here in this space, joining us?
Buy them.
I mean, some of the largest of those companies operate in multi-countries themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest ones are operating outside their home boundaries as well.
Yeah.
And so I think their management, again, it's almost creating a safe haven again, isn't it? It's an environment that corporations like those can come to because familiar names are there too. And it's what happened, I believe, in our whole movement as well.
Yeah.
Corporations were comfortable together, it grew and it broadened into different forums, and I think the same is true as we take the same sort of dialogues into other contexts.
I think the more that they become to realize that this kind of work is not just sort of social corporate responsibility, but is really part of their bottom line, that they'll become interested in doing it. And we have engaged many different corporate partners in our partnerships, and it's very easy to engage them on sort of an education partnership or a health partnership. But when we get into the democracy and governance and human rights area, it's much more difficult. But they're starting to realize that democratically stable societies, inclusive societies, make for a better bottom line for corporations. And so when we are able to launch this partnership, what you'll see is that there are actually folks funding LGBT who've not funded LGBT before, which is really an amazing thing. And so kind of bringing them into a partnership is also, I think, to them a sort of a safe way. If they're going to do it with the US government, and it's sort of a safe thing to do. But
I think it will begin to happen naturally as well. I mean, Samsung is a great example because they started off by making chips, I think.
Yeah.
And then they began to make kind of televisions, and increasingly now it's tablets and phones and software. And the more that shift continues, the more they're going to need really smart, intelligent, mobile people. And recruiting those smart, intelligent, mobile people isn't going to be possible unless they're willing to make those people feel included, whether they be people from anywhere around the world, people from LGBT backgrounds, whoever. So I think that change will begin to happen, on its own. But I think there's some encouragement we can probably give.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that I use Samsung because in the same way as Singapore, I think if there's a country, in Samsung, there's a company that could be there to make change as well. So, yeah. I mean, I would just be interested, if I know you can't talk very much about it, Claire, but if there is any bit more details that you might be able to give about this partnership that you have. Just because it...
No, I just think it's going to be fabulous, and I want to thank the people in the room who are the partners, and it's going to be dynamic, and it's just one way to come together, but I think it'll be effective, and it's working with a lot of local civil society organizations. And
is it just about money? Because that's because that's one of the things that when we mentioned with the activists and the groups that we're working with outside in the global south, that they see it as money.
No.
That, the corporation will take money and run, as it were. But we want to try and add something more value to that.
No, absolutely. I mean, we've got, technology companies who are coming into this who are actually going to go and help, provide a lot of technical assistance and software in terms of strengthening these civil society organizations so that they can organize and have management systems and all of those sorts of things. So it's absolutely not just about money. Of course, they like it when we give them money and can strengthen their budgets. A lot of it is about technical assistance and convening. Convening is so important, and convening not just on a national level, but on regional and global levels, and a lot of training and those sorts of things. We're going to some social entrepreneurship activities, social enterprise, which are very, very important and can actually link into the supply chains of some of these multinational corporations.
Because when we've been talking to corporations over the last few months about how they could get involved with our work, I mean, we have been trying to see how the international LGBT networks could become a part of some of the work that we're doing. We are setting up a couple of programs. One is called the Think Again program, which will be trying to change attitudes in society, in the media, with politicians, in politics, in business, in countries where it's illegal to be gay. And that there could be a way of linking in with LGBT networks to be a part of that. Do you think that, I'd throw that to Mark first of all, because I see that as, do you think that might be something that you would be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very sensible way to go. I just wanted to pick up on something Claire said there, which we haven't talked about at all, which is the power of social networking and the new media. And I think this is a really critical part of any campaign. And to kind of make an analogy to that, I'm sure you're all familiar, or many of you will be, with the It Gets Better campaign. And that's less than a year old, and we did a little session on it at Google about a week ago with some NGOs, and it astounded me to hear that there are almost 100,000 videos have been posted to that YouTube site since It Gets Better started, which is I think 7 months ago, and they're into kind of millions of hits now. So the power to utilize things like Facebook and Google Plus and YouTube are really, really vital for anyone that's interested in changing the agenda.
And of course, they're available all over the world.
And for free.
Pretty much everywhere.
It just accelerates it so much more so than just doing it through, organically. If we try through organizations. We need to do both. But it also it's a much freer touch, right? You don't have all the controls that, and some of them appropriate that corporations have to make when they're rolling things out as they introduce policy changes and others. Social media allows you to really open that dialogue quite widely and to connect between organizations and companies and individuals, most of all.
And it really sort of begins to leveling the playing field between the quote-unquote haves and have-nots, but decreasing economic disparity.
And on that note, I should have mentioned that Kaleidoscope yesterday launched sort of an online campaign on YouTube and a video. It's an advertising campaign entitled "What if it were illegal to be you?" You can get that see the video itself on our website, which is kaleidoscopetrust.com. The campaign has been designed by Saatchi's, and it is to really sort of get the message out across to the wider public of what if it were illegal to be you because you had brown hair, or you had blue eyes, or you were 4 foot 10, and it's to show that it's as stupid to pick on people for their sexuality as it was to pick on something else as just a part of them. And we're hoping that's something that we're going to be using very much on social media. On another point as well, that Kaleidoscope, as part of our work, is we've been having a lot of dialogue with corporations, and we are looking to set up an international sort of business network, as it were, and we're very keen to sort of for corporations to become a part of that, to enable us to take that message to the LGBT activists around the world, and also connect in with what we're doing with the government. So I mean, it'd be interesting to hear views back on that as well. I'm being sort of told that our time is almost coming to an end. This has been really fascinating. I don't know if there's I suppose, just like to ask us before we close, where do you think we can go from here? What's our sort of next step on this stage?
I mean, I think the challenge is to bring in a wider audience now, and for the dialogue, whether it's a conferencing or not, but it is about bringing in those who are now already part of the movement, if you will. I mean, we have a lot of the committed here and companies that can now interact with each other and that share a lot of common values. But I think it is about going to the next tier, whether it's in our own countries or the next tier size corporations and companies, if we look at it from a business perspective, or bringing in some others that are very large players in other countries that I think can be even more of an influencer of change in that country than any of our companies might be able to be.
Yeah, very good point.
Well, when I was at university, the British government introduced something called Clause 28, which was a very repressive piece of legislation against gay people. And that was when I started fighting for LGBT rights. And I never dreamed at that time that we would have, you know, civil partnerships, equal employment rights, all the raft of legislative protections that we have in this country, and that we would have a culture in the UK, which I think last week was voted probably the most gay-friendly country in the world. So I think that anything is possible, and that we shouldn't constrain ourselves to not reach for the stars on this.
I definitely agree with Mark. I think it would be great to have a convening like the sort you mentioned, and to bring it, the NGOs, the corporations, government, and the foundations all together. I think that would be fabulous. And I can't remember one where actually all of those different actors came together globally. So I think that would be amazing. Yeah. And I think the time is now.
Yeah, that's what we feel as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo what Mark said. I think if you think about the change that's happened in the UK in the last 15 years, it's gobsmacking, quite frankly. And I think that other places could go through that change at that rate too. So I think we should push on. I think we're doing the right things. Push on boldly.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.